Madam Speaker, the Vice President and the United States Senate.
观众朋友们好，现在您看到的是华尔街电视的华尔街现场节目。现在我们为您带来的是美国国会参众两院联席会议在今天2021年1月6日对2020年总统选举人票进行正式清点，并宣布最终结果的现场。这是美国总统大选的最后一步。在以往，国会宣布选举结果一般只是一种仪式，但是这一次选举，由于川普总统本人拒绝承认败选，并且坚称存在着选举舞弊情况，而多位共和党议员也对选举结果提出异议，因此1月6日在国会中进行的这样的一次程序将更富波折，也更富悬念。现在我们为您看到的是国会现场，我们看到红木箱子，其中装的是经过认证的选举证书。按照美国的联邦法律，在1月6日国会参众两院联席会议的主持人是参议院的议长，也就是副总统彭斯。现在我们看到彭斯在主席台上，而按照规定，如果彭斯本人没有办法到场，或者是需要中途休息，就需要由参议院多数党中供职时间最长的参议员，共和党籍的爱荷华州参议员格拉斯利来进行主持。现在屏幕上出现的是副总统彭斯，我们看到他戴着口罩，遵循美国现在的卫生防疫规定。在整个会议过程中，会议的主持将打开各个州密封的证书，也就是刚才屏幕上闪现的红色木箱中所存放的文件。这些证书上会记录着各州所派出的选举人团在12月14日所投票的结果。而在公开唱票之后，会议主持也会宣布是哪位总统和副总统候选人赢得了多数选举人票。现有的选举团认证结果显示，拜登获得306张选举人票，而现任总统川普获得232张选举人票。但是，国会在经过正式清点之后所做出的宣布，才是2020年大选的最后定论。一般来讲，这个程序会在半个小时之内就完成。但是今年由于有多位议员已经提前告知会提出异议和辩论，这个过程或许会更加漫长，可能会延续数个小时，甚至在今天晚上也不会结束。因此，我们的直播计划也会根据相应的程序变化以及时间进行调整。那我们也知道，根据1887年的选举计票法，在整个国会的唱票过程中，任何一位议员都可以任何理由对某个州的选举人票计票结果提出异议，他只要说反对或者英文叫做 objection 就可以了。但是会议主持是否会听取这些异议呢？这是存疑的，除非这个异议以书面形式提交，并且获得至少一位众议院和参议院的联名签署，才是符合条件的。那我们也知道，此前至少有一位共和党的众议员，阿拉巴马州的共和党人莫布鲁克斯，计划在今天的唱票过程中提出书面异议，而这样的异议也获得了密苏里州的共和党参议员乔西获利的联名签署。如果出现这样联名签署的书面异议后，那么国会的联席会议就需要暂时休会，参众两院必须要退回各自的会议厅，分别进行不超过2个小时的辩论，然后两院要对这项异议来进行投票。如果这项异议没有同时在两院获得简单多数支持，就维持现有的计票结果。目前大概已经有140多位共和党的众议员表示投票反对现在的投票结果。但是，鉴于民主党在众议院占到多数，1月6日所提出的任何异议几乎不可能在众议院获得通过。现在会议正式开始，我们看到在场议员起立，听从众议院议长佩洛西的讲话。现在众议院议长佩洛西提醒大家，在整个过程中，我们需要遵守现在美国社交隔离方面的准则和规定。 同时，众议院议长佩洛西提醒大家，我们今天拥有对于我们国会的责任，以及对于美国人民和宪法的责任。现在，佩洛西主要强调的是有关于卫生防疫方面的规定。我们看到他戴着口罩，因此声音有一些模糊。他刚才讲的是，你可以与你的员工和助理进行近期交谈，但是你们不可以站得太近，必须要遵守现在有关于社交隔离的规范。现在我们看到参议院的议长副总统彭斯在两锤定音之后开始他今天主持会议的进程。彭斯现在摘下口罩，一锤定音宣布开会。在场的国会议员们，我们遵从美国的宪法和法律。今天我们需要做的是对于选举团的结果票数进行认证，并对美国的总统和副总统人选进行正式的认证以及确认。现在我们要做的整个过程是由计票箱开始唱票，并由4位在场的现场计票人对于票数的真实性以及可信性进行进一步的确认。如果出现了反对意见，那么我们将继续针对现在的现有程序进行辩论。如果没有反对意欲，那么我们就将继续。我们将从阿拉巴马州开始，针对每一个州的选举结果进行相应的唱票。整个过程按照字母顺序进行，第一个是阿拉巴马州，最后一个是怀俄明州。我们现在唱票中所会看到的是来自该州的选举官员所提供的选举正式证书，并针对其中的结果进行进一步的确认。现在我们看到来自弗吉尼亚州的参议员提出了相应的意见。
May I ask how one would make an objection or make a parliamentary
现在
inquiry
他
in
主要
the
问到的
future
是，
if you're not
如
on
果
the
有
floor
一
but
个
in the
人
gallery?
有现在的反对意见，那么他将以什么样的形式提出？
Under Section 18 of Title III of the United States Code,
现在彭斯引用美国法律
permitted in the joint session.
相关的文件说，我们将在联席会议中进行相关的提出，并在各自的
I'm
辩
not
论过
attempting
程
to
中
debate.
进
I'm
行
trying to
辩
find
论
out。how a parliamentary inquiry or a
现在
parliamentary
议员澄清
point
表
of
示，
order
我
would
没
be
有问有
made
关于
in
这
following
样
with the
的
speaker's
辩论的问题。我的问题
request
更多
that
是
most of
程
us
序
not be
性
on the
的。
floor.
因
How
为
do you
刚
make
才
one of those points
有
of
关
order
于
when you don't know
佩
what's
洛
going to
西议
happen
长
later?
所提出的问题，就是现在既然不让我们保持在整个选举议厅中的社交中的交谈，那么整个辩论到底应该以什么样的形式来进行？而现在彭斯继续说，我们将根据我们宪法中的相应规范来进行辩论议程的程序性的进展。现在彭斯重新戴上口罩。 好，现在我们看到彭斯在与身边的工作人员进行交谈。好，一锤定音，正式开始过程。
Mr. President,
Order in the chamber.
Mr. President,
The gentleman will continue.
the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Alabama
主席
seems
先
to be
生，阿拉巴马
regular,
州的
informed,
选
and
举选
authentic.
票似乎在形式上是正规的、真实
That
的。
Donald J. Trump of the
唐
state
纳
of
德
Florida
J.
received
川普
9 votes
获
for
得了
president,
9张总统
and
票，
Michael R. Pence of the state of Indiana
来自印第安纳州的
received
迈克尔
9
·彭斯
votes
获得
for
了
vice
9张
president.
副总统票。 现在彭斯问，现场是否有反对意见呢？他同时再次重复，刚才我们的认证人已经认证，阿拉巴马州的选举投票在形式上是正规的、真实的。确认总统川普以及副总统彭斯获得9张选票。现在，彭斯再次强调，我们选举的过程是针对选举票进行唱票，并且进一步认证。现在是阿拉斯加州，认证人表示，主席先生，阿拉斯加州的选举投票似乎在形式上是正规的、真实的。唐纳德·川普获得了3张选举团票，来自印第安纳州的迈克尔·彭斯获得了3张副总统票。
Are there any objections to counting the certificate of vote of the state of Alaska that the teller has verified?
现在，彭斯继续问到：有人对阿拉斯加州的选举投票有异议吗？刚才选举人已经对票数结果进行了唱票以及认证。
Hearing none.
在场没有异议。现在我们到了亚利桑那州。现在，彭斯再次强调，每州的选举人票的唱票结果来自该州已经认证过的选举团投票结果。
Mr. President.
主席先生，
certificate of the electoral vote
亚利桑那州的选举团投票似乎在形式上是正规的、真实的。来自特拉华的约瑟夫·拜登获得了11张总统票。来自加州的卡马拉·哈里斯获得了11张副总统团票。好，现在我们看到，似乎有人提出异议。彭斯问道，在场有没有人提出反对意见？现在是来自亚利桑那州的议员提出议言，他说：“我自己以及我的16位同事希望提出异议，对于亚利桑那州的选举团票提出不同意见。”现在彭斯继续问道：“现在你们的选举团票是否？”反对意见是否由参议员来共同联名反对？那么现在旁边的克鲁兹议员站起来。刚才我们向大家介绍到，根据1887年的选举团法，如果反对意见以书面形式提出，并且同时有1位参议员以及众议员提出反对意见，那么联席会议将暂时休会，同时将转入各自的参议院和众议院进行最多不超过2个小时的辩论。现在彭斯确定。这样的反对意见是以书面形式提交的，并且是由参议院以及众议院各自至少1名议员所签署的。因此，我们现在接受这一份反对意见。
Objection to counting the electoral votes of the state of Arizona.We, a member of the House of Representatives,
现在来自国会议员的反对意见开始正式提出，对于亚利桑那州的选举人团票进行认证的决定进行反对。原因是这些选举团票似乎并没有做到形式上以及过程上完全的正规和真实。现在，彭斯继续问到有关于亚利桑那州选票结果的情况。现在，彭斯宣布，原因有这样的反对意见，现在我们将从联席会议中退席，参议院以及众议院将各自回到各自的议会来进行辩论，因此整个联席会议现在暂时休整。那我们看到，在场的克鲁兹议员作为参议院中关键的反对一票，正在与其共和党的同事进行激斗。那么现在整个现场中，我们看到刚刚开始的会议就正式结束，但是这并不是今天整场选举认证的结束。 我们看到，在整个场外焦急等待的是记者，他们正在等待即将从联席会议中退场的议员。现在我们正在看到我们现场的直播现场。刚才正如我们所说的，联席会议暂停休会，原因是在按照字母顺序公布的第3个州亚利桑那州就出现了反对意见。那么刚才在众议院这一边提出反对意见的是戈萨议员，他表示，整个的这样的一个反对意见是由60位同僚共和党人所签署的，并且获得了1位参议员克鲁兹议员的支持。现在联席会议正式休会，我们看到两党的议员陆续走出联席会议现场。如果您刚刚来到我们今天的直播现场，现在您看到的是华尔街电视的华尔街现场节目。今天我们为您现场直播的是国会参众两院联席会议，要对1月6日此前11月3日2020年总统选举的选举人票进行正式的清点，并最终宣布结果。我们也知道，以科鲁兹为首的11位共和党参议员在上周6发表声明，要求成立一个选举委员会，以10天的时间对于选举结果进行审计。那么，如果是按照这个计划，审计结果会在1月16日公布，也就是总统就职典礼的4天前。这些共和党参议员表示，如果国会拒绝方案，那么他们就会投票反对现有的结果。这样的举动显然从票数上来看没有办法真正扭转局面，因为已经有大概20位共和党参议员表示会投票承认拜登胜选，再加上民主党现在在参议院所占的席位，这使得对于现有的选举结果所提出的任何异议不大可能在参议院获得通过。但是尽管如此，今天的这一场选举认证仍然备受关注，就是整个的过程十分曲折。那我们也此前为您介绍，在出现反对意见之后，国会参众两院各自回到各自的所在的会场进行辩论，最多有2个小时的时间。而今天刚刚由于亚利桑那州出现反对意见而进行的休会辩论，可能并不是唯一的一次。至少在亚利桑那州、佐治亚州以及宾夕法尼亚州都会有类似的反对意见提出。如果按照每一场辩论都要持续2个小时计算的话，那么整场的认证会可能要持续至少6到8个小时。如果有超过3个州出现争议结果，那么可能持续的时间会更长。因此，之前媒体也都有预计，可能今天这将是一场马拉松式的辩论会，甚至可能到1月7日星期四才会有相应的结果。这里我们也要特别强调，参众两院的联席会议在正式清点选举人团的票数过程中收到书面异议，这种情况本身并不常见，但是也并不是没有先例。那么根据此前的资料，我们发现上一次出现这种情况还是2005年，当时民主党的参众两院的议员都对俄亥俄州的计票结果提出了异议，认为其中存在着一些不正常的情况，但是两院在各自辩论之后都投票拒绝了这一项的异议。而此前我们向您介绍到的11位共和党参议员提出了成立选举委员会对选举结果进行审计，这呢在历史上也有先例，尽管非常罕见。当时还是1877年，由于对1876年总统选举结果存在争议，国会成立了由5位参议员、5名众议员以及5位大法官组成的15人选举委员会来审查这项争议，并依据选举委员会的投票结果确定了最终的赢家。现在屏幕上为您展示到的是众议院的辩论会场。现在我们看到， 现场的画面中，来自众议院的议员和助手正在走来走去，他们刚刚结束了联席会议，现在各自退回会场。那么，按照此前的规定，将会针对选举团结果进行辩论。两党的议员将各自提出支持以及反对意见。现在，两锤宣布
The chair
开始
will
会议。
remind members of the need to adhere to the decorum requirements of the
议
chamber
长佩洛西开
as
始
laid
发
out in the
言，他提
Speaker's
醒大家
announced
需
policies
要遵
of
守
January
众议
4th,
院有关于发言
2021,
的相关
in
规定以及
accordance
行为
with
准
the
则。
guidance and advice of the attending physician.
他
Members
这
are
里特别
advised
强调的是
to
有关
remain in
于医
the
疗专家
chamber
给出的健
only
康方面的
if
提
they
议
are
以及
participating
美
in
国国会
debate
辩论
and
相
must
关
wear a
防疫
mask
准
at all
则。
times,
他
even
提
when
到
under
众议院
recognition
现在
for
在
debate.
进行辩论的时
Members
候，
must
必须
also
要戴着
practice
口罩来进行，
proper social distancing
同时也
when
必须要保
present
持
in the
社交
chamber.
距离。
Let the record show that there is a gross violation of this guidance from the attendants on the Republican side of the
现在
aisle.
佩洛西不
Please,
无
in
尖
the
酸地指
interest
出，
of your own
我们国
health
会中的
and
众
as an
议
example
我们
to the
众议院中的
American
共和党
people,
议员经常被发
abide
现
by
对于
the
这一项
numbers,
规则有所违
now
反
up。to 25 on each side of the aisle, to participate
现在他特
in
别
this
强调来
stage
自
of the
国
development.
会
Okay?
两党
Pursuant
各
to
自通
Senate
道不能超
Concurrent
过25位议员
Resolution
来进
1,
行相关的辩论以及正式说话。现在梁锤
pursuant
表
to
示让
Senate
大家安
Concurrent
静注意。
Resolution 1 and Section 17 of Title 3 of the United States Code, when the two houses withdraw from the joint session to count the electoral vote for separate consideration of an objection,
现在
a
我们正式在进行
representative
的
may
是
speak to
联席
the
会议暂
objection
时休
for
会后
5
的在
minutes
国会众
and
议
not
院
more
所
than
进
once.
行的辩
Debate
论。
shall not exceed
现
2
在我们正
hours,
式规定，
after which
每
the
一位
chair
辩
will
论
put
人
in
只
the
可以发
question,
言一次，发
shall
言
the
结束之后不
objection
可
be
以再
agreed
次发
to?
言。
The clerk will report the objection
而
made
每一
in
位
the
人
joint
提出反
session.
对意见之后，将由在场的国会
Objection
助
to
手
counting the electoral votes
来
of the
提出。
state of Arizona. We, a member of the House of Representatives and a
现在
United
正
States
式宣
Senator,
布有关反
object
对
to the
意见。
counting of the
我
electoral
们对
votes
于
of
亚
the
利
state of
桑那
Arizona
州
on
的
the ground
选
that
举
they
团
were
票
that they were not
的计票方式
under all
提
of
出
the
了异
known
议。
circumstances regularly
原因
given.
是
Signed, Paul
根据我们
Gosar,
所掌握
Representative,
到
State
的
of
证据，
Arizona.
整个这一次
Ted
计票
Cruz,
过程
Senator,
并没
State
有
of
在我们所
Texas.
了解到的实际情况下进行正规的、规范的、
The
完
chair
全
will
合规
endeavor
的
to
审计。
alternate recognition between members seeking support of the objection and members seeking opposition to the objection. The chair represents,
好，现在
recognizes
我
the
们
gentleman
有
from
一条
Louisiana, Mr.
场外的
Scalise,
突发消
for
息，
5
就
minutes.
是有上百的川
Thank
普
you,
党的
Madam
支持
Speaker.
者，他
I
们
rise today
冲过
to
了
object
国会
to a
后
number
面的
of
铁
states
栅栏，冲进
that did
了
not
这样
follow
的
the
一个
constitutional requirement for
国会的
selecting
大楼里。但现在我们看
electors.
到现场还
Madam
没有
Speaker,
受到
this is
影响，
something that is
而
clear
且我们
that
的
our
安全
founding
部署
fathers
也立即进行。
debated about as a fundamental
而现在
decision of how we
开
choose
始
our
发言
president.
的是来自共和
There
党
was
的
a
议
lot
员
of back and forth. If
他表
anyone
示
reads
有关于
the
在亚利
founding
桑那州
documents of
的
our
竞
country
选过程中
about
所出
the
现的一些
different
不正
versions
常
they
的情
went
况
through，to ultimately come up with a process
而最后
where each state has elections, each state has a process for
我们的建国
selecting
领袖
their
们
electors
经过
and
第
sending
九
them to
的辩
Washington.
论
And
以
Madam
及不断
Speaker,
的规
in a
范，
number of those states,
终
that
于确定了有关于选
constitutional
举
process
应该如何
was
进行
not
的
followed.
宪
And
法
that's
程
why
序
we're here to。
但是
object.
议长先生
If you look
议长女
at
士，
what the
我们必
requirement
须要强调的
says,
是，有很
nowhere
多
in
有
Article
关
2,
于这
Section
样
1
重
does
新
it
定下的
give
投票
the
以及认证
Secretary
的
of
方式
State
没有
of a
被
state
严格
that
的遵守。
ability. Nowhere does it give the governor that ability. Nowhere does it
比如
give
其中
a
有关
court
于选举
that
到
ability.
底
It
是由谁
exclusively
有
gives
权
that
来进
ability
行认
to
证
the
以及宣布
legislatures.
当
And
时
in fact,
我
in
们可以
most
是
states,
立法部
that's
门
the
而
process
不
that was
是州
followed.
长。
But for
在
those
很多的
states
州
that
州
this
政市，他
wasn't
们所
followed,
规范
unfortunately,
并且
this is
进
not
行遵守的这样的一个
new.
原则。但
We've
是很不幸
seen，
在有一些州
over
也
and
出现
over
了不正
again
常的现象。
more states where the Democrat Party has gone in and
现在我们
selectively
看
gone
到有
around
越来
this
越多的这样
process.
的州，如
That
果
has to
民主党
end,
在这个
Madam
州
Speaker.
占
We have to
占多数
follow
占
the
到
constitutional
主动
process.
地位，那么这样的一个程序就有所违反，并没有
Now,
被
there
严
might
格
be
的遵守，而
reasons
我们必须要
why
停
some
止这
people
样的
don't
程
like
序
the。process laid out by a legislative body.
的确，有一
Madam
些人对于
Speaker, I
立法
served
机
on
构
one of those
所进
legislative
行
bodies
的、所
when I was
确
in
定
the
的这
state
样的投票程
legislature
序
for
感到
12
不满。
years. I served on the
议长
House
是
and Governmental
我
Affairs
对
Committee
这
where
样
we
的
wrote the laws
疑惑以及
for
这样
our
的不满
states'
深有所
elections.
感。我
And I
曾
can
经
tell
处
you,
在类似的
when
位
we
置上。
had to make changes Those were extensively negotiated.
但是我必
We
须
would
要强
have
调，
people on
所有的
both
这
sides
些
come,
程序性的过
Republicans
程
and
都经
Democrats,
过
Madam Speaker,
时间
would
非常
get
长的辩
together
论
to
以
work
及
through
认证，
those changes,
来
any
自两
minute
党的议
change,
员针对
to how
整
a
个选举过
precinct
程
would
中
function,
微乎其微
to
极其细
how
小
a
的差
change
异，
would be
以
made
及
in the
有可
time
能
of
出
an
现的任
election,
何变动，
signature
都进行了
requirements,
充
all
分
the
的
many
辩论。
things that involve a clerk carrying out the
这其中
duties
有很
in
多
each
细节，
parish in our case.
甚至是
You would
是
see
谁
people
那些
come
具
and
体的
give
议员来
testimony.
认证整个选举的过
Madam
程，都
Speaker,
经过
both
细
sides
致
could
性
come.
的辩论。
Clerks of court were there in the hearing rooms. It was an open process, by the way.
整个的过程是一
Not
个开
behind
放的过
closed
程，
doors in a
并不是
smoke-filled
闭
room
门进行
where
的，
somebody
并不
might
是
want to
不对
bully a
公众开
Secretary
放
of
的。
State to get a different version that might benefit
整个的过
them
程没
or
有
their
任何
party
的
or
胁
their
迫，而是
candidate.
通过
That's not
完
what
全
our
公开、
founding
公
fathers
正
said
的
is the
这样的一
process.
个讨论的过
Maybe
程
it's how
来
some
进行的。
people wanted to
这正是我
carry
们
it
的国
out.
父们
But they laid out that
所采
process.
取的智慧的过程
And。so when we would have
对
to
于
make
整个
those
选举
changes,
的
they
程
were
序
in
进
public
行的
view.
明智的确
They were
认。
heavily debated. And then ultimately,
但是
those
在
laws
整个
were
选举法
changed
中，
in
经
advance
过
of the
这样
election
细
so
致的辩论
everybody
所形成的
knew
过
what the
程，
rules were.
尽管其中
People
有
on
很多
both
的细
sides
节有具体的
knew
差
how to
异，
play the rules
但是
before the
这
game
是我们
started,
整个选
not
举过
getting
程的
somewhere
基石，
in the
也是我
process
们
and
必
saying,
须
well, you
所
don't think
遵
it's
守
going to
的规
benefit
则。
you, so you
因
try
此，
to go
这样的规则
around
一
the
旦确立之后，
Constitution.
就变
That's
得
not
不
how
可
our
更改。
system works.
不能说
It's
你
gotten
觉
out
得
of
其
hand.
中有哪一点值得更改，
And so
就进
President
去把
Trump
它
has
改变
called
了。
this out. And
而有趣
President
的
Trump
是，
has stood up to it. So many of us
川普总
have
统
stood up
他
to it.
正指
And
出
in
了这一
fact,
点，他
over
站起来
100 of
指
my
出了
colleagues,
更
Madam
改
Speaker,
选举
asked
过程
the
中所
Supreme
存在
Court
的不
to
当的
address
形
this
式。
problem
我
just
的
a
许多
few
同
weeks
事，包
ago.
括我在内，
And
都向我们的最高
unfortunately,
法院提
the
出了我
court
们的
chose to
异议。
punt.
对
They
于
didn't
整
answer
个
one way or
选举
the
过程
other.
中出
They
现的
didn't
不当
want
的
to
更
get
改，
in the
提
middle
出
of
了
this
我们的异
discussion.
议。但是很
We
不
don't
幸的
have
是，
that luxury
法院
today.
并没有对我们的官司进行
We
相应的
have
重
to
视，
discuss
也并
this.
没
We
有
have
进
to
行
fix
相应的
this.
更改。
In fact,
但
on
是
our
我们现
first
在
full
必须
day
要
of
讨
this
论，
Congress,
我们现在必须要
many of
讨
us
论的
brought
是其中出现
legislation
的问题。
onto the House floor to start fixing the problems with our elections, to
你
restore
知道，我们
integrity
中的很
to
多
the
人
election
都
process,
拿
which
到
has
了
been
立法，
lost by
他
so
们希
many
望对于我们整
millions
个
of
选举
Americans.
过程中
And we had a vote.
出现的不正常的
Every
情
single
况来
Republican
进行
voted
辩
to
论。
reform the process.
我要
Every
告诉
single
你，
Democrat voted against it.
在过去，在
They
这样的
don't
一
want to
次辩
fix
论
this
投票过程
problem.
中，196位
But
投
the
票的共和党人
Constitution
每个人都支持
is our
针对
guide.
整个选举过程
And
中
it's time we start
来出
following
现的
the
任何的问题来
Constitution.
进行
It's
相应
time
的
we
讨论。
get
但
back
是我们的民
to
主
what
党
our
同事
founding
没有
fathers
一位
said
民
is
主
the
党同事愿
process
意进
for
行这样
selecting
的讨论。
electors. That's the legislatures.
你知
In
道，
public
我
view,
们的建国
not
国父
behind
们
closed doors,
已经
not
对于整个
smoke-filled
的过
rooms,
程进行了
not
相应的规
bullying
定。
somebody
他们
that
告
might
诉我
give
们
you a
是由
better
立法
ruling.
机构
Let's get back
是由
to
立法机
rule
构
of
来
law
进
and
行整
follow
个
the
选举过程中的认证，
Constitution.
以及对其
Madam
中的各
Speaker,
种细
and I
节
yield
来
back
进
the
行负
balance
责，
of my time.
而不是州长。
Gentleman's
好的，
time
以
has
上就是我
expired.
要表现的，以上就是我要表达的
For
反
what
对意见。
purpose does the gentlewoman
现在，在场的共和党议员们起立表示鼓掌支持。
It's over now. I thought it was adjourning. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek
To
recognition?
strike the last word.
现在来自
Without
加州的议
objection,
员进行发
gentlewoman
言
is。recognized for
Madam
5
Speaker,
minutes.
Madam Speaker, this day marks a crossroads for American
议
democracy.
长女士，今
Those who
天对
object to
于
the
美国来
counting of
说
the
是十
Electoral
字路
College
口上
votes,
重
which
要的
reflect
一
the
天。
votes of the American people,
来自选
wants
举
to
团的这
set
些
what
投
to
票
substitute
反映
their
了美国
preferences
人
for
的
the
民意
voters' choice. That's not what our Constitution requires, and it's at odds with the American Democratic
刚才
Republic.
我们的共和党同事
If
所提出的
Congress
意
selects
见
the next president instead of American
与
voters,
我们的
we'll have
宪
no
法不一
need
致，
for an
也
electoral
并不是
college.
美
In
国的价
fact,
值所
we'd
代
have
表
no
的。
need for presidential elections at all.
如果
We'd
只
be
有
moving
国
from a
会的
government
选举人
elected
就
by
可
the
以
people
选择总
to a
统，那我们
government
还要
selected
选
by
举干
those
什么呢？
already governing.
这与我们
That's not
的选举
America.
精神
In the
是完
United
全相
States,
悖
we
的。
abide by the choices of the people, not an elite
在我们
few.
的美国，
The framers
我
of
们要
our
尊重的是
Constitution
选民的
considered
意
whether
见，
to
而
have
不是我们的
Congress
政治
select a
精英的
president
意见。
and
这也
specifically
就是
rejected
整
it.
次大选的
Instead, they
价
wrote
价值
Article
和意义
2
所
and the
在。
12th Amendment. Article 2 creates the
在
Electoral
12修
College,
正案中
where
的
each
第2
state
条
appoints
明确对
electors.
此规定，
Laws of all
每州
50
可以
states
进
and
行
D.C.
选
require
举人
electors
的指
to
认。
vote for the winner of the state's popular election.
但
Each
是
state provides for the
选举
orderly
人需要认
conduct
证
of
的是在
elections,
该州获得
including
了
lawful
普
challenges,
选票的
recounts, and the
胜
like.
者。
The 12th Amendment is what brings us to today. It
因
says
此
the
我
electors
们
meet
今
in
天
their
正是
states.
因为
That happened
12修正
December
案中所
14th.
规定的有
The
关于选
amendment
举的
says
条
the
例而
electors
来到
shall
了这
cast
里
their。votes, sign and certify them transmit them
是
to
按
us
修正案
sealed.
对
That's
于整
been
个
done.
选举过程
The
中的规
sealed
则进行
envelopes
了明确的
containing
叙
the
述。
signed
投票
certified
进行
ballots
后，
of
针对
each
胜
state's
者进
electors
行确认，
reflecting the votes of the
对于
people
票数
were in
进
those
行确认，
mahogany
对票数进
boxes.
行密封，
The
并通知
12th
国会
Amendment
进
directs
行
the
最终的
President
认
as
定。
the Vice President as the President of the Senate to do only this.
我们的宪法
Open the sealed
只认
envelopes
副
and
总
then the
统
vote shall
所
be
有的权
counted.
利，
Simple.
只是
It
把我
doesn't
们
say
的选票
counted
从
in a
密封箱
manner
中打
that
开，
some
并
members
针
of
对
Congress or the Vice
其结果
President
进
might
行唱
prefer
票。
no.
这就是
The
他有
votes
权利
are
所进
simply
行
to be
的全部。
counted as certified and transmitted by the
而我们
states.
知道，我们宪法中有
During
明确的规
Reconstruction
定，
after the
所有
Civil
的选
War,
票
more
结
than
果
one
应该按
slate
照
of
之
electors
前
were
大家投
appointed
票
by
的结果以
states.
及被认证的投
Dueling
票结
lists
果
were
而进
sent
行
and。protracted processes were undertaken in presidential elections. And as a
在我
result,
们的整
to
个
make
选
an
举过
orderly
程中，所有
process,
的这些程序
Congress enacted the Electoral Count
被
Act
准
of
确无误的执行以及遵守。
1887. This law
因此，
governs our proceedings
正
today.
是这
The
样的
Act provides
法律
dispute
指导我们将如
resolution
何对于今天的
mechanisms.
结果进
Under
行
the
认证。
ECA, if a governor certifies a slate of electors and there are no
根据
competing
现
slates
在
from
现
that
行法
state,
律，
the
由
governor's
每州的
certified
州
slate
长
must be
以及每州的
counted.
选举官员对
Today,
于
every
每州的
single
选举
slate
结
of
果来
electors,
进
one
行
by
认
Joe
证。
Biden or one by Donald Trump,
而现在我
got
们
their
看到，不
governor's
管各个州是
certification.
由川普总
Not
统
a
还是
single
由乔
state
拜登
submitted
赢
a
得了胜
competing
利，
slate. There's no
整
dispute
个
to
这样的认
resolve.
证过程都已
The
经完成，在
2020
其中也
election
没有出
was
现
the
争
most
议。
secure election conducted in modern
2020年的
history.
选举是美国
Challenges
历
were
史上所
resolved
出现的
by
最安
lawful
全的选
recounts
举。
and audits.
国
The
土安全部的
result,
官员已
Vice
经这
President
样告
Biden
诉我们。
won the 2020
而
election.
选举的结果
More
展
than
示，
60
副总统
lawsuits
乔
were
拜登
filed
赢得了
contesting
306张选
elements
举
of
团
the
票，获
election
得了胜
process.
利。
None of these lawsuits prevailed. Why? As
川普总
even
统本人
President
有
Trump's
在法庭
own
提出
judicial
争议的机
appointees
会，
ruled
他这样
there
做
was
了，
no
但是
evidence of
没
any
有一起诉
wrongdoing
讼
that would change the
在
outcome.
整
The
个
people spoke.
法庭
It
上
was not a close
顺利的
election.
通过。
The
原因是
margin
什
of
么呢？
victory
因为
for
他没有
Biden
展
in
示证据，
2020
整个程
was
序
larger
是完
than
全
Trump's
正当而且
margin
是合
in
理的。
2016. In fact, the Biden victory is one of the most decisive in
正
modern
常选
times,
举并不是
exceeding the
非
margin
常激
enjoyed
进
by
或者是
Reagan
存
when
在
he
争议
defeated
空间的。
Carter in
我们看
1980.
到拜登获得了历史性的胜利，
Congress has
远
gathered
远
in
领
joint
先于
session
川普
to
总统
count
败选
electoral
所得的
votes
票数。
every 4 years since 1789. I understand the
从
disappointment
18世纪
people
开始，
feel
我
when
们
their
的选举
candidate
就
for
有序进
president
行，
loses.
每4
I've
年
felt
就
the
进
same
行这样
several
的一
times
次
in
选
my
举。
voting life. When that
我知道
happens,
选举的
it's
结
not
果
an
并不总是
invitation to
符合我们
upend
所
the
愿。我自己
Constitution
知道，曾
and the
经有
laws
过
of the
选举的
United
结果
States.
所选出的胜
It's
选
an
人士，并不是
invitation
我
to
中
work
意的
with the
候
new
选人。
president for the good of the
但是
country
我们必须知
and
道，
to
整
wait
个
for the
选举
next
有其特
election
定的
in
法
4
律程
years
序，我
if
们
you're
必须遵循。
dissatisfied. In that
选举
spirit,
有其结
I
果，
urge my colleagues to
而未来4
uphold
年
the
就是
American
需要面对的
democracy
结果。
and reject the
因此
objection,
我强
and
烈
I
呼吁
yield back
在
the
场我的
balance
同
of
事
my
们
time.
尊重美国的宪法程序，对于合法选举的结果进行认证。
Who is that?
好，现在来自加州的
For what
议员
purpose does the gentleman from Ohio
发言结
seek
果介绍
recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise to
来自
support the
俄亥俄
objection.
州的，我们看到吉姆
Without
乔丹
objection,
开
the
始发
gentleman
言。
is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, Americans instinctively know there was something wrong with this
议长女
election.
士，美国人知道
During the campaign, Vice
整个
President
选举中
Biden would do an
出现了
event and
一
you
些
get
问
50
题。
people at the event. President Trump, at
我们
just
看到
one rally, gets
在
50,000
大选
people.
集会过程中，
President Trump increases
拜
vote
登
with
的集
African
会
Americans,
几乎没有
increases
什么
vote with
人去，
Hispanic Americans, won 19 of
而
20
川普
bellwether
总统
counties,
的一次
won
集会
Ohio by 8,
所出现的人数，
Iowa by
所有
8,
比
and Florida
拜
by
登
3.
的
Got
所有
11
人
million
数
more
都
votes
多。
than he did in 2016, and
而
House
在这次
Republicans
选
won
举的过
27 of
程中，
27 toss-up
川普总
races.
统
But
所得到
somehow,
的票数比
the
他
guy
在
who never
2016
left
年
his
历史
house
性胜利中所
wins
得
the
到的票
election.
数还要多。
80
但
million
是
Americans,
出
80
现了一
million
种
of our fellow
意外的
citizens,
情况，
Republicans
就是
and
最终的
Democrats
胜
have
选者
doubts
居
about
然
this
是乔
election.
拜登。
And 60 million people 60 million Americans
我
think
必
it
须要
was
强调，
stolen.
有
The
6000万
Democrats
美
say
国
no
人他们的
problem,
票数
no
被盗窃
worries,
了。
everything's fine.
难道我们就可以
We
说
asked for
什
an
么问题也没有，
investigation.
一切都正常吗？
We asked
我们
Chairman
真的可
Nadler,
以这样说
Chairwoman
吗？
Maloney for an investigation. They said no.
我们
Wouldn't want to
要求
investigate
相关的部
something
门
that
来进
half
行
the
调查，
electorate
但是
has
被拒
doubts
绝了
about.
司法部不这样
It's
做
just the presidency
，FBI
of
不
the
这样
United
做，他们
States.
告诉我们没有问题。
Why?
到底出了什么
Why
样的
not
情
one
况？
single investigation? Why not even one
为什么
single
他
hearing
们
over
不
the
能
last
够
9 weeks in the
进
United
行一
States
次
House of
调查，进
Representatives?
行这
Why?
样一次重要性的调查，来告诉我们其
Because
中
all the
到底发
Democrats
生
care
了什
about
么
is
样的
making
事情
sure
呢？
President Trump isn't
因
president.
为你们这
For
些民
4 and
主
a
党
half
人，你
years,
所在
that's
乎
all
的
they've
只
cared
是
about.
赢得
July
总统选
31st,
举，把
2016,
川普总
before
统
he was
推翻
elected
下
the
台，
first
过去
time,
整个4年，你
Jim
们所做
Comey's
的唯一的
FBI
事情
takes
就是
out
这
the
样。
insurance
在4
policy,
年前，
opens an
科
investigation
密
on
对
the
于
president
川普总统
based
进
on
行了调查，
nothing.
而整
May
个调
17,
查基本没有
2017,
任
Bob
何合
Mueller
理的
named
基
special
础。
counsel. 2 years, they investigate the Russia hoax.
2年之后，有关于俄罗
lawyers,
斯骗局的结果
40
出来了，我
agents,
们看到了什么
and
呢？
$40
其中没有
million
任
of
何
taxpayer money
证
for
据。
nothing.
而却花到了
December 18th,
上百上千万的来自税收人的钱，
Democrat
这是完
House
全浪费
members
的情况。
vote to impeach President Trump
而在国情研
based
中，
on
我
an
们又
anonymous
看到了
whistleblower with no first-hand
国会
knowledge
中的
who
民
was
主党
biased
人
against
要
the
对川
president
普总
and
统
who
进
worked
行弹
for
劾，
Joe
他们的
Biden.
依据是什么呢？是匿名
But
的
none
人
of
的
that
举报
worked.。As hard as they
他们想
tried,
做
none
的
of
是什
that
么呢？
worked.
就是
They
推翻
threw
川普
everything
总
they
统
had at
的
him.
胜利，把
So
总
what
统
they
之
do
位交
next?
给乔拜登，但是所
They
有这
changed the
些都
rules.
并没有奏效，这
They
些
changed
都
the
失败
election
了
law,。and
因
they
此，
did
他
it in
们
an
走出的最后
unconstitutional
一招
fashion.
就是
And that's what we're going to
来改
show
变选
over the
举
next
法，
several hours of
来改
debate.
变选
The
举的规范，
Constitution is
来
clear
帮助他们自己
as
获
Whip
得胜
Scalise
利。
just said. State legislatures and
在
only
我们的
state
宪法中
legislatures
明
set
确规
election
定，
law.
只有
In
立法
Arizona,
者，只有立法
The
者
law says
可
voter
以确认各
registration
州
ends
的
on
选举
October
法。
5th. Democrats said, we don't care what the law says.
我们看到，在
They
亚
went
利
to a
桑那
court,
州，
got an Obama-appointed judge
在
to
10月5
extend
号的
it
时候，
18
此前并没有
days.
选
No
举法的
debate,
相
as
关
Steve
改
talked
变，但
about.
是他们选择了
No
一个
debate,
奥
no
巴马
discussion,
所
we
任
just
命
did
的
it.
法官，对于
Pennsylvania,
整个
same
选举
thing.
法进行了彻底的改变。这是合
Pennsylvania
法
law
的吗？
says mail-in ballots have to be in by 8 p.m. election day.
再说宾
Democrat
州，
Supreme Court said, nope.
宾州的法律
We're
规
gonna
定，
extend it.
所有的邮寄
Election
选
day
票
doesn't
都
end on
必须
Tuesday
在选
now.
举日之
They
前收
took
到
it to
并
Friday.
进行认证。
Extended the
但
election
是
3
民主党人
days,
说
not the
这不是真的
legislature.，
不，我们要改变这些
Partisan。Supreme Court. Pennsylvania law says mail-in ballots require signature verification.
而宾夕法尼亚州的选举
Democrat
法也说
Secretary of，State
所有的邮寄选票都必须要有签名
I'm
来
gonna
确保
decide
真
by
实性。
myself
但
that
是
it
民主
doesn't.
党说不，我们不需要这一些，
4.6
我们可以破坏
million
这些
ballots.
选举法。
Pennsylvania law says mail-in ballots can't be processed until election day.
现在
Some
宾夕
counties
法尼亚
said
州
no.
的选举法还告
You
诉我
can
们，
imagine
有
which
关于
counties they were.
宾州的人称
Democrat-run
投票、
counties
邮寄
said
投
no and
票
allowed
不可以
ballots
在大
to
选
be
日之后
cured and、
大
fixed
选日之前进
before
行计
election
票，
day.
但是有一些相应的郡县却
They did
违
a
反
hit
了
and
这
run
样的规
around
定，这
the
难道是正常的吗？
in
这
every state
是对
that
宪
Republicans
法
will
的
object
公
to
然的
today.
违反。
Every single
在
one.
每一个州，
It
我们
was a
共和党人
pattern.
都对
It was
这
their
样的公
template.
然违背
They
行
did
为
it in
进行了相
Arizona.
应的反
They
对。
did it in
不管
Georgia.
是在
They
亚
did
利
it in
桑那州，
Michigan.
不
They
管
did
是
it
在
in
密西根，
Pennsylvania.
是
They did it
在
in
佐治
Nevada.
亚
They
州
did it in、
宾
Wisconsin.
夕法尼亚州、威
And
斯
yet
康
some of
星
our
州还是
members,
内华达州，我们都提出了这
some
样的反
members
对意
say,
见。
don't worry about it. We
我们
shouldn't
中
do
的有一些成
anything.
员说，
Just let it go.
别在乎吧，我
It
们
was
就这
just
样
6
放过了
states
吧。只
who
有最
violated
后
the
的几千吧。
Constitution.
但是宪法不允许我
What
们
if
这
it's
样
10
做。
states next time? What if it's 15? What if in 2024, 2028, it's
但是
26 states?
我
What
们
if
必
it's
须
half
看
the
到，
states?
如果在未
Do
来
an
再
end
次
run
出
around
现
the
这样的
Constitution
情况，
clearly
难道
spells out.
我们可以允许这样的情况
We-
继续被违反吗？
we are
如
the
果是在
final check and
2022年、
balance.
2024年出现这
The
样的情
authority
况，我们又将
rests
怎么
with
做呢？
us, the United States Congress, the body closest to the American people, right where the founders wanted it.
我们必
We
须
should
保
do our
持美
duty.
国国会
We
仍
should
然像我
object
们的
to
建国元勋们
and
所
vote
坚持的
for
那
this
样，坚守
objection
这些宪
to
法
the
原则，
Arizona
保持为美国人民的
electors.
服务，
Madam
并且
Chair, I
坚
yield
守
back.
对于美国人民的责任。
Thank you.
好，现在金乔丹结束了他的发言。
Purpose does the gentleman from California
现在我们
seek
看到来自
recognition?
加州的议员
Madam
有提
Speaker,
出
I
了
rise
相
in
应的意
opposition to
见。
the objection.
The gentleman is recognized without objection for 5 minutes.
现在来自加州的
Madam Speaker, a little
议员
more than 2 months ago,
提出了
America
相应
performed
的
an
观点。
extraordinary feat. Under some of the
在
most trying
一个多
circumstances in
月
our
前，
history,
美国
our
人
fellow
完成了一
citizens
件伟大的
conducted
胜举。
a free and fair election,
我们完成
vindicating
了
our
一次公
founders'
平透
belief
明的
once
选
again
举。
that we were capable
我
of
们的建国
self-government
元勋
and
相
a
信我
peaceful
们，我
transition
们
of
可
power.
以通过合法的
On
程
November
序，
3rd, the American
来
people
使得美
chose
国的
Joe
选举
Biden
公
to
正
be
透
their
明的
next
进行，
president
而
by
这
an
正是我
enormous
们所
margin.
做到的。
The successful conduct of that
选举
election
的结果
among the
显
most
示，
secure in
拜登
American
副总统
history
获得了
was
选
not
举
an
的决定
accident.
性的胜利。
It was the result of the dedicated work of thousands of volunteers, canvassers,
而正
workers, electors, and state and local election officials. When the conduct of any state election was challenged, the courts, through judges appointed by Democrats and those appointed by Republicans, heard unsubstantiated claims of fraud, found they had no merit, and said so. But most important, the American people persevered. In the midst of the worst pandemic in a century, America had one of the most impressive elections in a century with historic voter turnout. Our fellow citizens did their civic duty. The question we face today is, will we do ours? That we are here with a substantial number of our members seeking to overturn an election is remarkable, tragic, and all too predictable. or it is the natural result of a locomotive set in motion months ago with a
但
myth.
是我们看到，很不幸
For
的是，
weeks and
有一些
weeks
共和党
before,
的同
during,
志
and
们
after
针
our
对这样
election,
的
a
选举结
dangerous
果提出
falsehood
了
was
异议。
propagated
这虽
that our
然
election
会
would be
让人觉
marred
得
by
遗憾，但
massive
是这
fraud.
并不让人惊讶，
Never mind,
因为
it
在
was
过
the
去的
same
一段时间
election
里，我们已经看
which
到
brought
类
the
似的
very
进
men
程
and
在
women
不
to
断
this
进行中。
chamber who would challenge its results. What value has consistency when measured against ambition? A
在
former
过去
senator
的
from
这样的一个
Georgia,
选举中，当他们赢
remarking
得
on a
选举的时候，
contested
他们就
election
没
over
有
a
对选举
century
结果
ago,
进行进一步的挑战，
said
但是当
that
收到的时候，他们
able
却对
men,
选举结
learned
果
men,
进行了挑
distinguished
战。
men, great men in the
因
eyes
此，
of the
一致
nation
性这又算得
seemed
到什么
intent
呢？如
only
果
on
在野心面
accomplishing
前
a
的话，
party
简直不
triumph
值得一提。
without regard to the consequences to the country. That is
这一
human
些共和
nature.
党人对于
That
选举
is,
结
he
果所
said,
提出的异议，完全基于他们的
unfortunately,
个人政治
party
野心
nature.
与政治目的，
Was he
与
right?
整个国家的福利和福祉
We
没有任何
stand
的
in
关
a
系。
house which was once the place of giants.
我们
Have
知
we
道，我们现
become
在所在的
so
国会曾经
small?
是美国的英
Does
雄
our
和
oath
巨
to
人所
uphold
在
the
的地方。
Constitution, taken just days ago, mean so very little?
我们曾经对
I
宪
think
法
not.
宣誓，宣
I
布我
believe,
们
to
对于
quote
宪
our
法的
dear
忠
departed
诚。
friend
难道我们的
Elijah
誓言
Cummings
就
that
如
we
此
are
无力吗？
better than
我不
that.
这么认为。我认
I
为我
think
们将
Elijah
会
would
比
be
这做
proud
得
that
更
the
好，我们
debate here
必须
today
要
is
做
not
得比这
between
更好。
Democrats and Republicans, and that some Republicans, including the Republican leader of the Senate,
我必须要
remain
说的
devoted
是，
to the
今天
principle
的
that we
分
are a
裂并
nation
不
of
是共和
laws,
党人和民主党
not
人的分裂，有
individuals,
很多的共
let
和党
alone
人，
a
比
single
如共和
individual.
党的参议院领
It
袖，
may seem
也
unfair
对于
to the
整
new
个的选
members
举
who
结
have
果提
only
出了与民
just
主
taken
党
the
人
oath
相
for
同
the
的看
first
法和
time
见解，但是仍有一些共
that
和
they
党
should
人
be
选
so
择
soon
提出异
tested
议，选
with
择
one of
对
the
于
most
宪法不
consequential
平的程
votes
序
they
以
may
及原则
cast
进
no
行
matter
不
how
满的
long
违
they
反。
serve. But it is so, and none of us can shrink from that responsibility.
现在我必须要告
Nor
诉大
can we
家的是，
console
我们每一个人
ourselves
今
with the
天站在这
intoxicating
里都有
fiction
必要的责
that
任。
we can break that oath without consequence, because doing so
我
will
们
not
必须要说，
succeed in
选举是
overturning
有
the
相应
election.
的后
An
果。
oath is no less
我们每一
broken
个人都
when the
曾经立
breaking
誓，
fails to
但是
achieve
我们在
its
宪法
end.
前的这样的立誓不能够
We
轻
must
易的
be
被打
mindful
破。
that any who seek to overturn an
我
election
们
will
必须
do
要对
injury
此
to our
保持警惕，
Constitution,
我们也必
whatever
须
the
要对
result.
此小心注意。
For just as the
那
propagation
些
of
想
that
要推
dangerous
翻
myth
选举
about
的
this
人，他们
election
对于
made
整
this
个宪
moment
法对民主
inevitable,
制
our
度将
actions
是十
today
分的危
will
险。
put another train in motion.
如果
This
今
election
天
will not be overturned,
我们对于整个
But
选
what
举结
about the
果
next?
做出了
or the one after that.
类似今天这样的
What
辩
shall
论，
we
这样的完
say
全没有正当性的
when
辩
our
论以及讨
democratic
论，
legacy
我们必
is
须
no
要
more
小心的是，
substantial
我们
than
可
the
能
air,
无意中已经推下了一
except
块
that
多
we
米诺
brought
骨牌。
trouble
这
to
对于
our
未
own
来
house
意味着什么呢？这
and
将有什么
inherited
样的重要
the
性呢
wind?
未来再次出
This
现
isn't
类
the
似的
first
情况，我
time
们又如何解
we've
决
had a
呢？
contentious election, and it won't be the last.
这并不是第
In
一次美国的
1800,
选
John
举史
Adams
上
lost
出
the
现了富
closely
有争议
contested
性的
election
选
to
举，也
Thomas
绝对不会
Jefferson
是最后
in
一
the
次。
first peaceful transition of power from one party to
就在
another
托
in
马
our
斯·约翰
history.
逊，就在托马斯·
Adams
杰弗
was
逊曾
hardly
经的
pleased
选
with the
举中，
result, choosing to
我们
skip
就
the
曾经
inaugural
看到
activities.
大家对于
But
选
he
举结
did
果不满，
what
当时亚
leaders
当
are
斯对于选
required
举
to
结果
do
提出了异
in a
议，对于选
democratic
举结果并
government
不满
when
意。
they
但是
lose.
我们看到，他们
He
最终
went
选择了民主
home.
原则至上。
He
当他们
went
输掉选举了之
home.
后，他们就回家认输，表示胜利
Jefferson,。has my time expired, Madam
No,
Speaker?
10 seconds.
现在他确
Would
认
later
是否还
refer
有
to his
时间。
victory as the Revolution of 1800, but marveled that the revolution had occurred by the rational and peaceful instruments of
就在过
reform,
去的一段
the
时间，我
suffrage
们
of the
看到我们的
people.
美国在曾经的历史上有这样的
It has
文明的
never
历史，
been our
但是
place
我们必须要知道，
to overturn an
现
election.
在好，他的时间已经结
And if
束
we
了
hope。to remain a democracy, it
现在
never
刚
will
刚说
be.
话的是国会的民主
For
党的
what
重要议
purpose
员
does the gentleman from
他
Arizona
是此
seek
前我们也
recognition?
听我们的重要的审议官之一，是美国是 美国国会司法部门的重要领袖。现在画面转向了参议院，我们看到正在说话的是参议院的少数党领袖舒默。现在舒默表示，我们的民主由其制度以及规则所保障，任何人，不管是选举官员还是其他人，想对整个的民主制度进行玷污与抹黑，我们都不能够允许。但是这似乎是共和党的一些反对者今天想要让我们做的。我现在要说的是，为什么这一些无辜的挑战必须不能够被接受。 我们必须要
And
确
it's
认
on
的
the
是，
general election ballot and
所有这一
identifies
些
what
有关
candidate
于
those
出现
electors
选
are
举舞
required
弊
to
的这
vote
一些指
for
控，完全
should
是
that
没有根
candidate
据的，
obtain the
完全是
majority of
虚
votes
假
in the
的。
general election. As part of the manner for determining electors, Arizona also establishes deadlines for voter registration. The deadline has been in place for 30 years.
现在他提出的是亚利
This
桑那
year,
州的选举规范
that
中所
voter
出现的一些
registration
不
deadline
正
was
常的情况。
October 5th.
在过
Early
去的
voting
30年
commenced
中，亚
2
利
days
桑那
later.
州的选举
5
注册
days
人的
before
截
the
止日
deadline,
期
a group
一直
filed a lawsuit
都是
demanding
有
that
相应的规
Arizona
定的，
election
但是在
officials
今
not
年整
enforce
个
the
的选
deadline.
举的截止日
The
期是
federal
有了推
district court
迟。
decided that since other states have a deadline later than Arizona's,
但是
and
联邦
some
的
even
法
allow
官却
for
认为，由于
registration
在
when
其
voting,
他
that
的一些州，
Arizona's new deadline would be a time
其他的
he
这样的截止
chose,
期限比
not the
我们的亚利
legislators'
桑那
timeline.
州要晚一些，因此在
The
亚利桑
appellate
那州
court
的截止期
effectively
限
overturned the lower
也
court
可
ruling
以。
and noted that the Arizona deadline established by the state
但是在
legislature
整个的法
was
院过程中，并
sound
不是毫无
and appropriate
毫
and
无
complied
争议
with the
的。地
Constitution.
方的下级法院以
But
及
the
联邦法
appellate
院
court
其中
merely shortened
进行
the
了相应的
extension,
辩
the
论。
bypassing of the deadline
比如
to
说，
10
在地
days.
方法院以及
The
联邦法
appellate
院
court
刚刚
without
我们
legal
提出了相
justification
应的
also
不同的意
decided
见，
that
而在
everyone
上
who
诉法院
registered
又对他们的判
after
决提
the
出了不
legal
同的意
deadline,
见。
but
在
before
整个
the
合法
deadline
的
created
截
by
止期
judicial
限之后，
fiat, could still vote. Note that the
有
Arizona
一些人在
legislature
亚利
was
桑
no
那州
longer
仍
in
然
control
投
of
票，他们
determining
的
the
票数
manner
也
of
被算在合
appointing
法选票之
presidential
内。
electors because the court had set a new deadline, even though the appellate court found the legislature's deadline was constitutionally sound. During that window, more than 32,000 voters registered in Maricopa
就在
County
这样的
alone.
一个有争议
Here
的时间
are
窗内，我们
copies
看
of
到有
those
超
voter
过3万
registration
人
records.
在整个的投票期限
In
内
going
进行
around the
了注
deadline
册。
set by the legislature, the court ignored the Arizona legislature's obligation and right to
但
direct
是
the
在
manner
做
for
出这样
choosing
判决的时候，
presidential
法院忽
electors
视了整个
as
亚
set
利
forth
桑那州
in Article 2,
选举法
Section
所
1.
规定的必要的
As
合
a
法权利
consequence
以及不
of
允
that
许所发
judicial
生的事情。
usurpation, more than 32,000 people were allowed to unlawfully cast ballots
正是由于这
in
样的情况，
Arizona's
由于整
presidential
个
election
司
in
法系统没有
2020.
对于这样的情况
The
进
Arizona
行及时的
legislature
阻止和判
seeks
决，
an independent
因此
audit
导
of the
致整
election.
个
The
亚利
governor
桑那
refuses
州
now to
的
call
选
them
举
into
结
a
果
special
出现了不
session.
当的选票，
The
以及选
Maricopa County
票
Board of
在合
Supervisors
法
has
截止
refused
期
to
限已
comply
经结束之
with
后，
legislative
进行投
subpoenas.
出。
In Arizona, the people who control the evidence related to the election have done everything possible to prevent an independent audit directed by the
而后来来
legislature.
自亚利桑那州的证人也
Arizona
表
have
示，
used the limited
在
amount
亚
of
利桑那
records
州相应的
available
选
to
举官员，他们禁止
investigate the
有关于
2020
他们所
presidential
提出的
election.
选举过
Of
程
a
中出现的
limited
不当
sample
以
of
及不正
1,000
常情况
addresses
进行
of
进一
voters,
步的讨论和
they
调
found
查。
539 voters did not live at the addresses on the voter rolls.
在亚
Here
利
is
桑那
a
州相应的调查中，我们发现
1,000
有
declaration
数
of
百人，
affidavits
他们
supporting
投票
that.
的地址与
I
他们在
object to the
注册上的
continuing
地址
counting
并
the
不
votes of
一致，
Arizona electors
但
because
是这
the
些
federal
票
courts
数也被计算
went
在
around
内
the。legislatively constructed mechanism for choosing Arizona's presidential electors, allowing tens of thousands of voters to unlawfully cast votes.
因此，
The
正是由于这
court
样的不
usurped
确
the
定
key
性，让
component
很多
of
非
the
法的选
Arizona
票得以在
legislature's
亚利
manner
桑那州
of
投
selecting
出。
presidential electors, thus violating Article 2,
因
Section
此
1.
通过
The
这样的
legislature is being
选票所
obstructed in
选
its
出的
efforts.
选举
And
团人，
What
直
little
接对
evidence
于
we
我们的
have,
选举法进行
or
了
little
违
information
反
we。have has produced this kind of evidence which indicates a significant problem with the integrity of the presidential election.
我们在整个大选过
Madam
程中发
Speaker,
现
I
了
ask
很
that
多
my
这样的
comments,
证据，正如我
my
在桌
written
上所展
comments
示的
together
这
with the
样。
voter registration records that reflect the 32,000 registrations permitted
正是由
in
于在
contravention of
选
state
举投
law,
票注册过程中所
letters
出
and
现的这一
resolutions
些
from
不
Arizona
正的情况，
legislators
亚利桑
pertaining
那
to
州
the
出现
count
了
of votes
大
from
量的非
electors,
法的选票。
along with approximately 1,000 affidavits and declarations pertaining
同
to
时，我们收
potential
集了
voter
大量
fraud
的
in
证据，
Arizona
包
in the
括
2020
1000位
presidential election, and the
经
statement
过
of
签署
Congressman
的
Randy
宣
Weber of
誓书，
Texas be
宣
made
誓
a
整
part
个
of the
过程
record.
中出现了不当的情况，但是这样的情况并没有被重视。而
Thank
这
you,
些非法
gentlemen.
选
For what
票也以
purpose
合
does
法
the
方式
gentleman
被
from
禁止。
Maryland seek recognition?
好，现在
Madam Speaker, I
欢迎
rise
再
in
回到国会，
opposition
是来
to
自
the
马里兰
objection.
的
The gentleman is recognized without objection for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I want to thank you first and all my dear beloved colleagues for your love and tenderness, which my family and I will never forget. Thank you again. Abraham Lincoln, whose name is a comfort to us all, said we've got the best government the world ever knew.
这个名字对于我们很多人来说
It's
都是
best
一种
because
精
the
神上的慰
first
藉，
three
同
words
时
of the
也是民主的灯塔
Constitution。tell us who governs here. We the people.
我们的宪法清楚
Watch
地告
this
诉我们，
proceeding
谁是
today
国家的主人，
and
是
tell the
我
world
们
with
的人
pride,
民。
as Lincoln did, about the brilliant meaning
而
and
今天，当
promise
我
of
们
our
向世界
country.
看到的时候，我们看到
Our
林肯当
government
时所确
belongs
认
to
的
the
原则
people.
在整个世界
As
上仍
President
然具
Ford
有
said,
先例，我们的民
here
主制度
the
仍然
people
具有
rule.
光芒。
Today, we are in the
人民
people's
统治，
house
人
to
民做
complete
主，
the
人民
people's
决定。
process for choosing
而今天
the
我们在
people's
国会
president.
所干的
We
事
assemble
情，
in
就
joint
是
session for a
以人民的
solemn
意愿
purpose
来
that
完
we've
成
all
人民的
sworn a
选择。
sacred oath to faithfully discharge. The 12th Amendment obligates each and every one of us to count the electoral votes to recognize the will of the
我们所
people
需
in
要
the
做的是
2020
来
presidential
正式认证人
election.
民
We
的
are
选择
not
和人民
here,
的意愿，
Madam Speaker,
来对
to
大家
vote for
已
the
经投出的
candidate we
票来
want.
进行正式的认
We
证，
are
并
here
且
to
正式将人
recognize
民
the
的意志进
candidate
行确认。
the
我
people
必须要强调
actually
的是，
voted
今天我们
for
不是来选
in the
择总统
states.
是谁的，而是来
Madam
确认
Speaker,
人民的意志，而人民已
The
经表达了他们的意志。
2020 election is over, and the people
议长女
have
士，我必须要说的
spoken.
是，2020年的选举已经结束了，而且人民已经表达了他们的意见和见解。
Joe Biden received more than 80 million votes, 7 million
小拜登
more
获得了
than
超过
President
8000万
Trump,
张
a
选
number
票，
larger than any other
并
president
且
has
比
received in
川普
U.S.
总统获
history.
得了更多的选票。
This sweeping popular victory translated into an
整个这样的
electoral
一个
college victory
惊人的
of
胜利，如果
306
是
to
算到选举人票
232,
上，13
a
6
margin
票
which
到
President Trump
232
pronounced a
票。
landslide when
4
he
年前，川
won
普总统也
those
是
by
以
those
同
exact
样
same
的
numbers
差距
in
而赢得了选举，而
2016.
当时他表示
So
这是
now
历
we
史性
count
的
the
压倒
electoral
性
votes
胜
that
利
were。just delivered to us in the beautiful mahogany cases brought by those hardworking
而
Senate
现在我们
pages.
看到美丽的红木箱
These
子中已经放入了这
mahogany
一些
cases contain
选举团
only
结
the
果，
538 electoral votes
而
that
整
were
个选
sent
举
in
团
by the
结果
states,
中，
not
正
the
是这些人民的
159
意志
million
的体现。
ballots that were cast by our constituents. Those were counted 2 months ago by hundreds of
选举团的
thousands
票
of
在
election
2个月
officials
前
and
正式
poll
投出。
workers across America who
在
risked
整
their
个美
health
国，
and
不
even
管
their
你是各行各
lives
业的人，
in the time of COVID
他们
to
在整
deliver
个
what
这一
our
次疫
Department
情
of
的
Homeland
非常
Security
时
called
期，仍然
the
克服
most
重重的
secure
艰难来投
election
出他
in
们神圣
American
的一票。
history.
而我们的选
Many
举
of
官员
these
普遍
officials
说
have endured
，2020年
threats
的
of
选举是美国历
retribution,
史上最安全
violence,
的
and
一
even
次。
death just for doing their jobs.
很多这些人，
Just as the popular
他们
vote
只
was
是
for
尽心
Biden,
尽力
so
地
was the
做了自己的
electoral
工
vote.
作，
On
听
December
命着威胁
15th,
胁
Senate
迫。
Majority Leader Mitch McConnell recognized it. The Electoral
我特
College
别要
has
强调的是，
spoken.
参议院的共和
Senator
党领
McConnell
袖
said from the Senate floor,
麦康奈
"Today
尔
I want
已
to
经对于
congratulate
总
President-elect
统
Joe
和副
Biden."
总统当
Yet
选
we
人
have seen
拜登和贺锦
escalating
丽进
attacks
行
on
了
our
祝福和
election
祝贺
with。unfounded claims of fraud and
但是
corruption.
仍
More
有
than
些共和
60
党人
lawsuits
在
have
我
been
们的国
brought
会两
today
院以及在
seeking
外
to
面对
overturn the
于整
results.
个
They have
选举
failed
结果提出了一
repeatedly,
些
and they
根
have
本
failed
不实的说法和言
spectacularly.
论。
Every objection we hear today maligning our states and their officials, both Republican and Democrat, has been litigated, adjudicated,
我们
and
也看到，
obliterated in both federal and state court.
在所有的
The
整个
president
的
has
这
not
样
just had
的
his
司
day
法
in
系
court,
统
my
中，所有
friends.
针对
He
于
has
选
had
举
more
结
than
果的
2
异议
months
和
in
挑战
court
都已经得
looking
到
for a
了
judge to
解
embrace
决。
these arguments. In more
其
than
中的
50
官司
cases, Madam
被所
Speaker,
有的
at
法
least
官都拒
88
绝。
different judges, including
至
many
少
appointed by
88
the
位法
president
官，其中
himself,
包括很
have
多由川普总统自
meticulously
己任命的
rejected
法官，
the president's claims of fraud
对
and
于
corruption.
川普总统所
Take
提出的不
Georgia
实
U.S.
说法
District
进行了
Judge
相
Stephen
应的反
Grimberg,
对。
named to the bench by President Trump this year. Last year, he rejected Trump's prayer to block certification of Biden's victory in Georgia, saying it has no basis in fact
在佐治亚州
or
的
law.
选举认证中，
Take
当时的
U.S.
法官
District
表示，
Judge Brett
川
Ludwig,
普总统
another
希望
Trump
拒
nominee
绝
who took the
佐
bench
治
in
亚州
September.
胜利，这
He
完全是
dismissed a
没有任何
lawsuit
规矩的，这
seeking
也
to
是没有任
overturn the
何理
results
由
in
的。
Wisconsin,
因此，在
calling
法
it
庭上必须要对
extraordinary.
他进行
A
拒
sitting
绝。
president who did not prevail in his bid for re-election has asked for federal court help in setting aside the popular vote based on issues he plainly could have raised before the vote occurred. He wrote, "This court has allowed plaintiff the chance to make his case, and he has lost on the merits. Trump has asked for the rule of law to be followed," Judge Ludwig observed, and he said definitively, "It has been." I've been a constitutional law professor for 30 years, and if I were to test my students on these decisions, it would be the easiest test in the world, because the plaintiffs have lost nearly every case and every issue in the most sweeping terms. That's all they would have to remember. There is no basis in fact or law to justify the unprecedented relief that is being requested of nullifying these elections. We are here to count the votes. Let us do our job.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Colorado seek recognition?
I rise to support the objection.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And to ease everyone's nerve, I want you to all know that I am not here to challenge anyone to a duel like Alexander Hamilton or Aaron Burr. Madam Speaker, my primary objection to the counting of the electoral votes of the state of Arizona is based on the Constitution and the direction of state legislatures through state law as spelled out in the following two clauses. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 states in part, and I quote, each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors. And the election clause of the Constitution provides state legislatures with explicit authority to prescribe, and I quote, the times, places, and manners of holding elections, end quote. For more than 3 decades, Arizona law set by the state legislature has required that voter registration end no later than 29 days before an election. This is clear. It is law, unless amended by the state legislature. This is the way it needs to be carried out. In Arizona, the deadline for voter registration for the 2020 presidential election was October 5, 2020. Using COVID as a reasoning, Democrats filed a lawsuit to extend this deadline by 18 days. And an injunction was made by an Obama-appointed judge preventing the Arizona Secretary of State from enforcing the constitutional deadline set by the state legislature. As a result of this frivolous partisan lawsuit, 10 extra days were added via judicial fiat to allow voter registration. These 10 days were added after voting had already begun. This is completely indefensible. You cannot change the rules of an election while it is underway and expect the American people to trust it. Now, in this 10-day period, at least 30,000 new voters registered to vote in Arizona. All of these votes are unconstitutional. It does not matter if they voted for President Trump or if they voted for Vice President Biden. They did not register in time for the election. The law states October 5th. Either we have laws or we do not. If we allow state election laws as set forth by the state legislature to be ignored and manipulated on the whim, partisan lawsuit, unelected bureaucrats,
他表示，现在好，我们现在看到有秩序。现在佩洛西击锤。
If we allow state election laws as set forth by state legislatures to be ignored and manipulated on the whims of partisan lawsuits, unelected bureaucrats, unlawful procedures, and arbitrary rules, then our constitutional republic will cease to exist. The oath that I took this past Sunday to defend and support the Constitution makes it necessary for me to object to this travesty. Otherwise, the laws passed by the legislative branch merely become suggestions to be accepted, rejected, or manipulated by those who did not pass them. Madam Speaker, I have constituents outside this building right now. I promise my voters to be their voice. In this branch of government in which I now serve, it is my separate but equal obligation to weigh in on this election and object. Are we not a government of, by, and for the people? They know that this election is not right, and as their representative, I am sent here to represent them. I will not allow the people to be ignored. Madam Speaker, it is my duty under the U.S. Constitution to object to the counting of the electoral votes of the state of Arizona. The members who stand here today and accept the results of this concentrated, coordinated, partisan effort by Democrats, where every fraudulent vote cancels out the vote of an honest America, has sided with the extremist left. The United States Congress needs to make an informed decision, and that starts with this objection. I yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Brian Mass.
而现在，我把我的剩下的时间给佛里达的议员，为他们继续我的发言。
Madam Speaker, I rise as well to support the objection, and I rise with a simple question. Can the chair honestly tell Americans that with pending Supreme Court legislation or pending Supreme Court case over legal observers not being allowed to observe and inspect signatures, that the laws and constitution of that state were not violated to change voting outcomes? Madam Speaker, I will wait for a response.
I'm sorry? Gentleman has 25 seconds remaining.
I will repeat my question. Can you honestly tell Americans that with pending Supreme Court case over legal observers not being able to observe and inspect signatures, that the laws and Constitution of Arizona did not be violated to change voting outcomes? And I will wait for a response.
Gentleman's time has expired. To what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to the objection.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, today is an important day. In 1862, during the depths of the Civil War, President Lincoln submitted his annual message to Congress, to this body, and in it he wrote the following: "Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. We of this Congress and this administration will be remembered in spite of ourselves. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth." We gather today, Madam Speaker, to ensure the survival of our grand American experiment, the greatest democracy this world has ever known. And there are millions of people watching today's proceedings. The eyes of the world are on us now, my colleagues, wondering if we will keep the faith, wondering if our constitutional republic will hold. Will we adhere to our Constitution, that solemn, visionary document that has guided us so well for so long and enabled the peaceful transfer of power for the last 230 years? Will we continue to be a country premised on the consent of the governed, a Congress that respects the will of the people, and a republic that will endure? Those are the questions before us today, Madam Speaker. With respect to my new colleague from Colorado, the question is not whether Joe Biden was elected the 46th President of the United States. He clearly was. The people of Arizona, like so much of the country, spoke clearly and resoundingly. They voted in record numbers. And over 81 million Americans selected Joe Biden as the next president. Now, today we hear from some in this chamber, not all, but some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, vague claims of fraud. No substance, no evidence, no facts, no explanation for why over 88 judges across this land have rejected the very same claims. Madam Speaker, the bottom line is this. As my colleague Representative Raskin so eloquently put it, the people have spoken. And that is why on December 14th, the Electoral College met to certify the election of a duly elected president, just as they've done for centuries. During terrible world wars, recessions, depressions, plagues, and pandemics, they met their duty, and they once again rose to the occasion and certified the election. And the question now is, will we do ours? Now, I know there are many textualists among us, many of my colleagues, who would understand that the Constitution must guide our work today, and the Constitution is crystal clear. Our duty today is a narrow one. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 3 reads, "The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and the House, open all the certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes shall be the president."
整个的选举结果就将得到认证。我们看到的就将是今天最终的选举人，这就是我们今天所做的需要做的全部情况。我们只需要做的就是确认美国人民的意志。这就是现在民主党人和共和党人被人民授权所做的事情，就是去尊重美国人民的意愿，并且对于选票结果进行这样的确认。在美国，对于自由、公正的选举结果，我们将进行确认。难道我们要把我们喜欢的选举人执意确认地推向选举胜利吗？我们需要做的是维护我们的宪法，对于宪法的精神进行进一步的确认。我们必须要对选举的结果进行认证，来维护整个国家所建立的民主基石。现在我结束了我的发言。
For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
现在我们看到来自路易斯安那州的议员又进行了反对意见的提出。
Madam Speaker, we have a solemn responsibility today. We must vote to sustain objections to states of electors submitted by states that we genuinely believe clearly violated the Constitution and the presidential election of 2020. This is the threshold legal question issue before us for the state of Arizona. We've got to repeat this for emphasis because a lot of people seem to be confused. Because judges and not the state legislature changed the rules of the election, Arizona clearly violated the plain language of Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution in its selection of presidential electors. The framers of our Constitution recognized that elections were susceptible to corruption. We all know that. So how did they fix it? How did they provide for that? They created the Electoral College as a safeguard, and they expressly empowered state legislatures to ensure the integrity of our unique election system. Only the state legislatures, because they're a full body of representatives and not rogue officials, were given the authority to direct the manner of appointing presidential electors because it was so important. The Supreme Court has acknowledged this over and over. They previously affirmed in Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, quote, the appointment of these electors is thus placed absolutely and wholly with the legislatures of the several states. That authority can never be taken away or abrogated. The Arizona legislature did enact detailed rules and procedures that that state was determined and is supposed to follow to choose its electors. But in the months preceding the 2020 election, as we've heard, by the way, 1,000 pages of evidence have just been submitted on the facts on this. Those well-established rules and procedures were deliberately changed. They weren't changed by the legislature, friends. They were changed by judges. And those actions taken by the judiciary were not limited to mere interpretations of existing law. No, they were substantive, wholesale changes to those statutes. That's a usurpation of the authority that the legislature had. That usurpation was repeated across the country this year. It's the primary reason. It's one of the reasons why the election of 2020 became riddled with an unprecedented number of serious allegations of fraud and irregularities all over the country.
现在我们已经看到通知，国会已经要求所有在国会山的相关的议员都离开卡蒙大楼。整个国家的首都现在准备进入封锁状态，原因是当时出现了暴力情况，有一些川普总统的支持者以暴力的方式冲击国会大楼。尽管现在现场的辩论仍然在继续。现在您看到的是第一个出现争议的州——亚利桑那州所出现的选举争议。而现在我们看到的是来自路易斯安那州的议员对于整个的选举结果来进行相应的辩论和争议。我们也看到，在刚才的辩论过程中，民主党议员主要强调的是整个选举是尊重民意的过程，只有人民的选择才说了算。而共和党的议员则主要强调的是，根据宪法的规定，最终选举法的权利是属于州立法。而由于在这一次选举中，由于疫情以及一些其他的特殊情况，针对于选举的认证时间、认证期限以及哪些选票可以被认证，出现了相应的修改，因此导致了一些不规范的状况。共和党人主要观点是，通过这样的不规范程序所投出的票不能够被接受。
Look, in our unique system, Congress is positioned as the last bulwark in a presidential election to ensure the Constitution has been followed. Indeed, in just 2 decades, the Supreme Court spoke to this. They plainly acknowledged this important deliberative role of Congress. There's the famous Bush v. Gore litigation. Everybody remembers from 2000. In a per curiam opinion, meaning all 9 justices, it was unanimous. They noted strict adherence to the provisions of the Electoral Count Act may, quote, create a safe harbor for a state insofar as congressional consideration of its electoral votes is concerned. However, they said, unanimously, the court said, since Title III, Section 5 contains a principle of federal law that would assure finality of the state's determination if they followed all the prescriptions there, if a legislature, the will of the legislature is attempted to be changed by a state court, that is a problem. That, they said,
现在我们要看到整个的国会现场出现了相当混乱的情况，尽管整个会场内的辩论仍在继续，但是刚才在国会附近出现了据报是发现了炸弹，整个的现在的国会办公室已经进行了人员的排查，并且紧急的排离。
It's a big problem for us, and it's one we cannot get
现
around.
在国
That's
会
why
上的
we're
警察
here.
部门已
I
经
urge
对
my
于周围
colleagues
的居民
today
发
to
出
look at
警
the
示，
facts,
希望他们
to
不要
follow
接
the
近
law, and follow our congressional oath. We're
整个
supposed to
的
support and
这
defend
样
the
的一个国会
Constitution.
大楼。
That's what we do here today. I urge everyone to do the right thing, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired.
现在我们看到辩论的过程中仍在继续。现在我们看到的是亚利桑那州选举结果的相应辩论情况，但是现在在国会大楼外出现了相当紧急的情况。稍后我们华尔街电视的其他节目也将为您介绍国会大楼外辩论现场这样的一个暴风与眼中的平静之外出现的更多风暴。把炸弹带到国会大楼附近的到底是哪方面的人？现在警方方面没有更明确的消息。
and grant Donald Trump 4 more years is the motivation behind it. And to
现在，民主党的议
continue
员继续介绍到，有关于这一次推翻国会选举的主要动力，就是帮助川普总统再获得4年的选举任期，这才是其中的根
because
本
there
原
is
因。
no viable constitutional or legal path to overturn the election that will
而
make
现在他们所做的
Vice
就是要
President
推翻
Biden
大选的
and
结果
Senator， Harris President and Vice President of the United States after
不
January
让乔
20.
拜登以及卡马拉哈里斯
One
顺利
certain
成为美
outcome
国
of
的
this
总
whole
统和副总
process
统。
is the weakening of our democracy and the threatening of our democracy.
而这样的情况对于整个的美国的民主将是非常重大的破坏以及袭
chase
击。
down a rabbit hole, baseless, discredited, and judicially discarded fringe
而整个这
conspiracy
样的情况
theories.
对于美国的民
But
主
for
的
the
基石以
record,
及民
let's
主的
talk a
精
little
神都
bit
是公
about
然的践踏。
Arizona.
在亚利桑那州也是这样。
And state and local officials did an unbelievable job.
在亚利桑那州，不管是州的官员还是地方的官员，都做出了惊人的努力和非凡的成就，对于选举的结果进行了认证。
County Party, the largest county in the state of Arizona, said,
在亚利桑那州
no
最
matter
大
how
的
you
郡县
voted,
的
this
共和党
election
的
was
领导人表
administered
示，
with integrity,
整个选举的过程
transparency,
中是
and in
透明的、
accordance
公
with
正
state
的，
laws.
也是与
Arizona showed up
亚
to
利
the
桑那
polls
州的
in
州法
record
相符
numbers.
合的。
More than 3.4 million people voted.
在亚利桑那州，我们
Increases
看
in
到
every
前所未
county,
有的空
and
前的投票热情。
65% of all eligible voters in Arizona voted in the 2020 election.
在2020年达到投票标准的成人，以前所未有的情况出现在选举台前进行投票。而最后，当结果出来时，我们看到拜登获得了亚利桑那州的胜利，整个的胜利是完全透明、完全公正的。这就是整个事实的全部。
And in addition to the presidency, these races include 9 members of the state's congressional delegation that are with you. 4 of them, my Republican colleagues.
好，现在我们再为大家关注到的是场外的抗议情况。现在我们看到脸书已经禁止了一些亲川普的集会，原因就是他们现在发现，在他们的脸书页面上出现了一些号召暴力的行为。那么整个脸书现在拿掉的这一个页面叫做“红色州分离”。 这乃是支持川普总统的一个运动，但是在整个脸书上以及脸书的声明中，没有提供相关的其他细节。
Rather than accepting the answers and the results of the election, they are fanning the flames of unfounded suspicion and once again creating a threat.
在整个的选举过程中，并没有出现所有的不当的情况，并没有出现所谓的选举欺诈的情况，所有的这些证据在法庭都被拒绝了。
just as they have no legitimate reason to question the results of the presidential election in Arizona. I ask my colleagues to reject this objection, to respect the will of the voters in the state of Arizona and throughout this country, and to fundamentally add some preservation to our democracy from any future damage that this effort that we are undertaking in this House today and in the Senate today does not further damage our democracy. And I yield back.
我们不能对我们的民主造成这样的伤害。好，现在我们看到整个的辩论情况基本已经进行了一半左右。那么现在我们稍事休息，稍后华尔街电视、华尔街网报节目将首先为您关注到今天国会其他地区的相应出现的情况。而当辩论进入高潮以及有重要性的人士来进行发言的时候，我们将重新回到直播现场为大家进行辩论。今天请您锁定华尔街电视，我们将陆续为您播报今天整个国会认证现场的其他情况，包括在场内场外出现的意外特征。好了，以上是这一时段的国会参众两院联席会议直播情况，认证2020年大选结果。今天是2021年1月6日。现在您在屏幕上看到的是众议院的辩论现场。现在针对第一个出现争议的州亚利桑那州的辩论已经过半。我们稍事休息，稍后继续。我是主持人 Lizzi 李琦，请您继续关注今天我们的其他节目。